question. So Mark in Gaithersburg says, as a union teacher burned out on the two parties, how will you concretely protect the blueprint, avoid privatization by stealth, and deliver smaller classes without new unfunded mandates? And how will you show teachers the money and the timeline, not just the message? Whew.
Well, I love this question because too often when you hear burnout and teacher in the same sentence, it's this very tired line in the mainstream media about how teachers are burned out and don't want to teach anymore, and there's a teacher shortage crisis. I mean, that crisis is manufactured by politicians and school systems that don't support committed teachers like Mark. So Mark's not burned out on teaching; he's burned out on the two party, or they're burned out on the two party. So I like the way that Mark flipped that around there. Protect the blueprint. I think this is going to be a multi-year conversation, but it seems like what is starting to happen with all this talk of fiscal crisis is that Democrats in Annapolis promised big. They promised generational change when it came to education, and then weren't willing to do the revenue generation, aka taxing the rich, in order to pay for it. So now they're saying elements, whether they admit it publicly or not, elements of the blueprint that are at risk, and that's due to lack of political boldness to go out and tax corporations and billionaires.
Yeah, and I hope Mark is in the union that is democratic and how it interacts with its members and its endorsements. But if Mark is a member of the MSEA, which is the biggest biggest education union for teachers in the state, then what happened for him in October was October.
It was October, yeah, mid-October.
Yeah, in October, the MSEA decided to use their Wes Moore first strategy. Or they call it incumbent first strategy, but I think in this case it's the Wes Moore first strategy. And instead of allowing me and Owen and other candidates for governor to present to their members at their big convention in Ocean City, they simply decided to allow members to vote up or down on whether to support incumbents or not. They sent us a nice email that explained this process to us, and they put us in their newsletter, which we appreciate. But we think that in a year in which the sitting governor that they just endorsed is about to try to take a second attempt to cut the spending for the generational investment in public education that is represented by the blueprint, it would have been good to allow us to make our case. But that's okay. We don't care about the leadership of these unions. They're just as corrupt as the politicians. We care about the people who are in these unions like Mark, and we're going to have these kind of conversations. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that on every single opportunity, we lay out our vision that Wes Moore is going to try to cut the blueprint funding again, like he did last year. At the beginning of last year's budget cycle, Wes Moore came in and he had taken this generational promise for public education, and he had proposed a bunch of cuts to it in order to make up for his political irresponsibility and failing to raise revenue in the way that he said he would when he ran in 2022. In 2022, he campaigned on taxing wealthy people like himself at a higher rate, but he refused to do it for 2 years because it was politically inconvenient for him, and instead, he proposed it last year in the middle of a fiscal crisis. This year, we covered last week, more fiscal crisis is coming, more cuts are coming, and the first thing they're going to cut is this blueprint funding because it is a thing that they never had any intention of paying for. They always had every intention of doing exactly what they're doing right now, which is promising teachers, students, and communities that they were going to make record investments in their education funding, and then and that they were going to do it over a decade. They never intended to do it over a decade. If they did, they would have raised the revenue to pay for it as soon as they tried to pass it and the budget office told them to do it. So what we're going to see next year is Wes Moore spending the year telling us that he's going to cut the blueprint in order to save the blueprint. And what we're going to be telling the press, what we're going to be telling Mark, and what we're going to be telling Wes Moore is you made this promise and you have to live up to it because our teachers, our students, and our schools and our communities communities are dependent on it. We should also look for him to try to privatize the jobs that are done by paraprofessional educators right now. He's going to use his edtech buddies in New York and his failed edtech startup, and he's going to try to come in here and offer to have technology AI like Claude that he brought into the benefits departments last week, taking away these jobs of hardworking people in our schools. Wes Moore is not pro-education, and it is a travesty and a shame that the MSEA endorsed him before they even saw him threaten to take away their prized big generational win. I was on a podcast a few weeks ago, and somebody described them as the most powerful union in the state. And I said, not anymore. They have given up their power. Watch them bend the knee and cower to this neoliberal who is going to try to cut education funding, privatize their jobs, and offshore as much as he can. So, Mark, I don't know what to tell you. We're going to do the best we can to fight for you and the other teachers who believed your union and your governor when they told you about that they were investing in this education. And we're going to make sure we hold them to account for the austerity cuts that they're going to propose, because it's coming. I guarantee it. This is going to be the year where Wes Moore tells us we have to cut education funding in order to save education funding. He's going to blame Trump. He's going to blame Republicans, but it's his fault and it's the union's fault.
We'll see what happens when we don't have guests. When we have guests, we're on our best behavior. And when it's just the two of us on the show, we let the skeletons out of the closet. So I, of course, agree, and I'm aligned with everything Andy just said. But, I will say I'm a MSCA member. I love my union. I worked hard and took a lot of risks to my livelihood, to my economic stability, to my relationships with people in my workplace to form one of the first new teachers union locals at my community college, affiliated with MSEA in many years. And so expecting just a basic level of democracy in which rank and file members could listen to all the choices and decide which one best represented their interests, or how they could extract concessions from the incumbent by hearing out challengers. That wasn't too much to expect. Workplace democracy isn't just about building power in the workplace. It's also about union democracy. And I don't think we really saw that with this October endorsement. So I hope, going forward, MSCA will do better. And I'm grateful for the other unions around the state that are and at least inviting us to engage in their process. They may not endorse us. They may not endorse anyone, but they recognize there's an opportunity to use their power rather than to give it away at even before the election year cycle has fully begun.
Yeah, we can talk about no kings all we want, but MSCA just went and bent the knee to Wes Moore without even asking, are you going to cut the blueprint? When it's very clear he's going to cut the blueprint, because last year he tried to cut the blueprint. And there's a fiscal crisis coming again this year, and that's going to be the first thing he cuts. It's the only thing. It's part of the plan. He never intended to have this be 10 years worth of funding. He said it in order to get votes, and now he's gonna sell you a bill of goods. So
the other thing that I'll just say real quick before we go on, the other thing that we should talk about that I think Mark and other rank and file public sector union members may be interested in is the right to strike. Right? You want to talk about how Maryland Democrats in Annapolis have constrained the power of organized labor and turned unions into lobbyists. It's by taking away the right to strike, which is a pretty basic right, even in most blue states around the country and certainly around the world. If you don't have the right to strike and withhold your labor, you're not a fully fledged union in some ways, because all you can do is contract negotiations, lobbying, which makes you dependent on politicians, and some more wildcat disrupting the labor piece at the grassroots rank and file level. So there's going to be pressure to bring legislation to Annapolis for all public sector workers, not just teachers, not just educators, to have their right to strike, and then we'll start seeing movement on the issues that Mark is talking about, money and timeline, and not just empty hot air promises.
Yep, totally. And I want to lift up Baltimore Teachers Union here. Baltimore Teachers Union went the opposite direction of the MSEA, and they invited us to participate in their process. And so, Mark, and if anybody else interested in education policy, we will be doing a lot of work on that this week or this month. We'll be publishing our questionnaire from BTU, and we are going to focus on making sure that we're providing real and concrete answers to the teachers and the educators like Mark who are worried that their burnout is because of their bosses and because of the union bosses and the politicians screwing them over again and again. And we're going to stand up and we're going to offer something that is real for them, and we're going to demand the Democrats meet the promise they made when they offered the blueprint as their decade-long investment in public education.